Hi, my name's Miranda Northrop, and I will be discussing what makes Ingrid Goes West a truly American film. For me, it's her pursuit of a warped American dream and her lack of definable identity, as well as the statement on mental illness in America, that make this film truly American. The American dream used to be a noble pursuit for anyone who wanted to work hard, but it has been slowly twisted into something much different today. And when you look at the American identity, or try to define what an American is, you'll see that we really lack a definable identity because of the culture being such a melting pot in our society. We can't define our identity in any one way, just as Ingrid and the other characters in the film have no definable identity. I'll discuss how these ideas make Ingrid Goes West an American movie. In Ingrid Goes West, the main character, Ingrid, appears to be a depressed individual in the opening scenes. We get a flashback to her obsessively scrolling through social media before assaulting a woman at her wedding. We then see Ingrid get released from a mental hospital and return to her deceased mother's home. Quickly, Ingrid finds someone on Instagram, Taylor Sloan, who she becomes obsessed with. She starts following her on social media and becomes elated when Taylor responds to one of her comments. This sparks an idea for Ingrid. She can leave her hometown, where people gossip about her openly, and go live a life in LA just like Taylor does on Instagram. She uses her inheritance to rent a small apartment and begins following Taylor around the city by frequently going to the places that Taylor posts about on Instagram. Then, Ingrid steals Taylor's dog and returns it, accepting a dinner invitation as a reward for the dog's return. This is how Ingrid weasels her way into Taylor's life. They quickly become friends, but this is costly for Ingrid as Taylor lives an extravagant lifestyle. She risks her friendships with her landlord and future lover Dan to pursue this relationship with Taylor. It does eventually crash around her when Taylor's brother Nicky comes to town and Ingrid is no longer the center of Taylor's attention. After a few group interactions, Nicky sees through Ingrid's lies and tries to blackmail her. This ends in Nicky being stranded in the desert, Dan being hospitalized with injuries from the interaction, and Taylor telling Ingrid that she never wants to speak to her again. In a last-ditch effort to be friends with Taylor, or to at least be near her, Ingrid spends the last remnants of her inheritance to put a down payment on a home that is neighbors with Taylor's home in Joshua Tree. Eventually, the two have a confrontation on Halloween, which results in Ingrid calling Taylor fake, and Taylor telling Ingrid that they were never friends. Ingrid then posts a video being herself and says goodbye to the world before attempting suicide. Ingrid then wakes in the hospital and immediately asks for her phone. Dan, still in a wheelchair, comes in and gives it to her, where it's revealed that the hashtag I am Ingrid is trending, and Ingrid now has more social followers than she ever imagined. The first theme I noticed in Ingrid Goes West is that of self-identity. We're presented with a character who seemingly cannot be herself, and instead morphs her identity around the person she's following or stalking at the time. As soon as Ingrid gets to California, she starts to become a replica of Taylor and does not have her true identity. Then, bits of her true personality show, and she suppresses them. We see that Ingrid really does want to be a good friend to Dan, for example, when she's worried about getting the truck that she borrowed back on time. She mentions to Taylor that maybe they should leave, but Taylor says, nah, let's keep partying. Ingrid falls victim to her stolen identity and does what Taylor wants to do instead of holding true to herself and getting the truck back to Dan on time. This is similar to the history of America and our cultural identity. You've probably heard the term cultural appropriation, which is when an individual or group steals cultural aspects from another group and either don't acknowledge the source or they use those cultural aspects disrespectfully. Think Native American headdresses being used as Halloween costumes. America's culture is a huge melting pot of ideas and practices from people groups across the world, which leads to the conclusion that our identity is not truly defined, or is defined by stealing others' culture. We seek other cultures and take them as our own, just as Ingrid did. Can we really say that Ingrid is wrong when America was founded on taking others' cultural identity and using it as our own? The theme of identity is explored through a macro lens in this film, as we see how social media allows people to portray their lives any way they want. Taylor manicures her Instagram to show her perfect life, full of happiness and friendship, but in reality, her marriage is struggling and she does not have any true friends, just the most recent friendship fling like Ingrid or Harley. We learn from Ezra, Taylor's husband, that Taylor was much different before she became an influencer when she first moved to LA, which leads us to wonder who Taylor truly is. Does she know anymore? Another theme that I mentioned earlier is the pursuit of the American dream. The American dream is something unique that America created for itself, unlike all of the character traits we have taken from other cultures. This movie as a whole acts as a commentary on the morality or saneness of that pursuit. 50 years ago, the American dream was to have a house with a white picket fence, a family, maybe even a dog. Now, one might argue that the American dream is to become as famous or popular as possible. Ingrid and Taylor both are in search of that new American dream, and they're only two among millions of people who have that same pursuit. Heck, even I have a TikTok and get excited when I get a new follower or someone likes a video I posted. What was once a wholesome pursuit has been warped into a goal where the goalpost seems to keep moving every time you open your social media app or news feed. The American dream as it once was has become near impossible for most of the Americans who are in search of it today. It can be argued that Ingrid was just pursuing her dream, even though she did it in a little bit of a twisted way. But how is she so different from CEOs that exploit the labor of their employees to get their third, fourth, fifth home? We praise these people as titans of industry and look down on people like Ingrid because they go about things in a little bit of a different way. This leads us into a third theme noted throughout the movie, which is the theme of mental illness. It's obvious that Ingrid is suffering from some sort of mental illness, but what is less evident is the illnesses that her compatriots suffer from. Taylor has built a fake life around social media and seems to only form surface level relationships. Dan is obsessed with Batman and seems to have never recovered from his parents' death. Ezra puts on a front of happiness and success, but deep down is unfulfilled and is seeking acceptance. He struggles with his identity. Nikki is addicted to substances and has a deeply untrusting personality. While Ingrid's mental illness is the most obvious, its important take on mental illness, as often the ones who are struggling the worst are the least likely to show symptoms. This also could be viewed as a commentary on how mental illness is treated in America. We often see people only get the help they need when they reach a breaking point, like Ingrid pepper spraying the individual at the beginning of the movie, or attempting suicide. These symptoms are the only things treated, and the underlying issues, such as Ingrid's loneliness and depression, go unchecked. We treat someone at a crisis and then let them go back into the same society that they broke down in and struggle until something happens again. We should be putting more effort into the treatment of mental illness as a whole instead of putting band-aids on the issues. Early in the film, it was evident that Ingrid Goes West is an allegory for the detrimental effects that our smartphones and social media have on society. This is pretty obvious, but still very poignant. One could argue that social media is the cause of Ingrid's issues, but I think her lack of identity and her mental illness are more to blame. There's an example of irony when Ezra says that he likes to keep private and doesn't use social media, but his art is just social media hashtags plastered across other people's art. This could also be a statement on how social media is just other people piggybacking off of other people's success in order to become successful themselves, like how Ezra was trying to use found art in his own art projects. There are a few examples of foreshadowing in the film, such as at the very beginning when Ingrid has a breakdown over social media posts. This foreshadows what will happen in her new Instagram obsession. There's smaller foreshadowing later on, such as when Dan tells Ingrid, "Don't be late," to his table read, which foreshadows that she's going to be late. We also see that Harley, A famous influencer who steals the spotlight from Ingrid in Taylor's life is wearing a shirt with the word stalker across the chest when we first meet her at the product launch that Taylor and Harley attended without Ingrid. While we, the viewer, already know that Ingrid is a stalker, this foreshadows that the interaction with Harley is going to be the stepping stone that leads to the others in the film figuring out that she is a stalker. After starting to see through Ingrid's persona, Nikki asks Ingrid if this is some single white female shit, which is an allusion to the 1990s film by the same name. Another interesting thing to note about Nikki is that he starts off his relationship with Ingrid by calling her a different name, Olga. This foreshadows that he will see through her persona because he's giving her a fake name, just as she has given herself a fake personality. Since he called her by something other than her name, this goes to show that Nikki doesn't see her as Ingrid. A quote that's relevant to the film is when Dan, while speaking about his childhood when he pretends to be Batman to avoid the sadness surrounding his parents' death, says that he pretends to be somebody else so it's like it happened to somebody else. This quote perfectly describes Ingrid's situation. She's struggling with a life in which her mother was sick and passed away. Instead of facing her issues head on, she's pretending to be someone else, Taylor. So it's like everything's happening to someone else and not herself. Earlier in this semester, we read a short story called Good Country People by Flannery O'Connor, where a disabled young woman is bamboozled by a Bible salesman. He convinces her and her family that he's a good country person and asks her to go on a walk with him. While out, they find themselves in the top of a barn, where he eventually steals her prosthetic leg and leaves her to fend for herself. Just as this short story is a message that perception is not always reality, Ingrid Goes West could be argued to have a similar message, that what people put out into the world via social media is not always the truth. Once you get to know someone and see past their persona, you figure out who they truly are. Each character in Ingrid Goes West has an unveiling throughout the film. Ingrid's persona is obvious, but Taylor's personality is much more well crafted and harder to crack. We see that Ezra admits to feeling like he's having an identity crisis at their pool party, which further exemplifies the idea that all people are struggling with their identity and put up a front to get what they want, just as the Bible salesman put up a front to get what he wanted from the young woman. The difference between Ezra and the other characters in the movie is that he recognizes within himself that he's struggling with his identity. While we don't see him break out of the cycle during the movie, there is hope that he will eventually figure out who he truly is. In what was a cringe fest from the start, Ingrid Goes West provides an identity to American culture. We as a society are just like Ingrid, latching on to the next best thing that will solve our immediate problem, which for her seems to be loneliness, instead of digging deeper and solving the underlying issues. The mental illness crisis in America will not be solved until we address the issues that exacerbate the illness people suffer with and provide attainable outlets for care. The original American dream of the picket fence won't come back until we figure out affordable housing and sustainable wages. And while I started this discussion saying that I don't think America has a true identity, I may have changed my own mind. It seems that our American identity is just our lack of identity. We, like Ingrid, are on the search for our next metaphorical high.